Hi, and welcome to Divorce on Planet Earth, Kate Sharp's real-world advice for well-intentioned humans. I'm your co-host, Jane Prelinger. Today's topic, my husband cheated, and I'm telling the kids how to deal with divorce, infidelity, and your children. But first, some housekeeping. Hey, Kate.
Hi, Jane.
Since our last episode, you and I have talked about tweaking our format.
Yeah. In retrospect, we should have probably seen this coming. But, since we've been inviting people to write in with their questions and difficult situations about separation and divorce, we've gotten a great response.
Mm-hmm.
But many of them are quite specific to a particular person's unique situation. And, everybody's situation is different and complicated. And we really can't give very specific advice tailored to any particular person's set of circumstances for a couple different reasons. One is we aren't meeting the person
Right.
and spending the time it takes to get to know them and listen to their story and get a sort of a three-dimensional view. And so we're really not in a position to give really anything particularly helpful in a real way. And the other reason is ethically, we can't offer any clinical services to people that we are not specifically working with in a confidential way.
Yeah.
So we're not ditching the format. We want people to continue to write to us with questions, and we will, if the question is something general enough, we'll use it as sort of a springboard for what's more, it is advice. We're building this as an advice show, but it's more general kind of guidelines. And it's really just our thoughts in that moment on that topic. It doesn't represent all our thoughts. We know it can't, that whatever we say here can't apply in every situation. It's a short format podcast. And any one of these topics could be a week-long seminar, right?
Yeah.
But so we just really want, and if the question is too specific, if they're local to us in DC, we could invite them to come in for a consultation with us or with a colleague, or we can sort of suggest they get someone local. But we just want to be really clear that that our conversations on the air really are not meant to be. They're not therapy, and they're not a substitute for divorce coaching or any other direct clinical services.
Yeah, Kate, that's really important. I'm glad you're making that clear.
Okay, having said all that, we are going to go back to our email format today, right?
Yeah, but I also want to say that for people who do email in, Kate, I just want to remind them that we will never share any email address, or any personal information, right?
Right, very important.
Yeah.
Okay. So we have an email from Janelle today.
Yeah, today we're responding to this email from Janelle. I think this is really important. Janelle writes, I know my boys love their dad, but he wants to tell them we mutually agreed to divorce. We didn't. He met someone else and announced he was leaving. I've never lied to my kids, and I'm not going to start now. Anyway, eventually they'll figure out what he did and what kind of person he really is. They might as well know now that he destroyed our family. I'm not going to have my kids thinking I had any part in that when I didn't, or give them the message that cheating is acceptable. Well, Kate, this is a tough one. Janelle is going through something incredibly painful, and she's clearly hurt and angry. But what are your thoughts about the right way for her to proceed when it comes to her kids?
Yeah, I agree. This is really a difficult question. There's so many questions packed in her question. I think maybe what I'll do is I'll just start with some general ideas about about this kind of situation in which one person has been cheated on. Now, there are lots of kinds of cheating, right?
Yes.
There's especially these days with with all the kind of ways of being in touch with people on the internet. There's the whole question of what is an affair anyway. And there are people who have had serial affairs. There are people who have had, kind of one night stands. There are people who have started new relationships, and, there are people who feel actually, it's strange, but it's perhaps counterintuitive, but true in my experience. I don't know about in yours, that very often the person who has the affair is not the person who wants to end the marriage.
Oh, yes. No, I see that.
Yeah. It sort of, seems like a counterproductive way.
Yeah.
But it happens. It happens a lot.
Oh, yeah.
So let me just say some general things about the situation, then we will kind of dig more into kind of specific things to think about when you're making decisions about how to navigate this problem. The most obvious thing is that it is an incredibly bitter pill to swallow, to present, to a united front with your ex when you're talking to your children about your separation and divorce, if you don't want the divorce.
Oh, yes.
And it's an especially bitter, it's a bitter, jagged pill when there's been infidelity. Some people just can't do it for a number of reasons. They just feel that, some people feel they really should not have to sign on, endorse a process that not only did they not ask for, but they've been so badly treated.
I see this. Yeah.
There's that. There are some people, and I want it to be clear, there is room for everyone on this show. And, I know you don't take a position, moral or otherwise, about how people feel about things. And there are people who are morally, who object to infidelity on moral or religious grounds. And I know that we're not going to convert anyone from that, and I'm not trying. I think that there are all kinds of affairs, and they mean all different kinds of things, and they can be, there are lots of ways to handle them. But I recognize that for some people, it doesn't matter what the circumstances are. It doesn't matter what came in the marriage before. An affair is an affair, and it's wrong. And they want their kids to know it's wrong. Okay. But there are still some things to think about. Even if that's going to be your position, there may be some other things to think about around that. And there are other people for whom, affairs are more complicated. Even when they're the cuckolded spouse, they may recognize that, the marriage wasn't that great. This is a crappy way to end it, but I understand that I had a contribution.
Yes.
Or they may get to that point. And others, see that but don't care. Cheating is bad. Cheating is wrong. So with all of that in mind, and also I want to add that when we're thinking about how and whether and when to talk to kids, it's also really important to think about the age of the child, because how you're going to handle something with a young child, school age or younger, is really different from how you're going to handle it with an older child, teenager, or young adult. They are obviously going to need more information. They may have more information already, but then the question is how to present it and what's the most really protective way, emotionally protective way to handle this with kids. Okay, so even given what I said about knowing that there are people for whom
affairs are just plain wrong,
wrong, I'd like to start by talking about some reasons that you actually might want to think twice about presenting your spouse as a villain, even if they did cheat. And then I think maybe talk a little bit about some more complicated and puzzling issues, like how to deal with direct questions from your kids.
Yes, I was thinking about that. That's really a rough one.
That's a rough one. You get a lot of curveballs.
Yes.
And when you get them from younger kids versus when you get them from older kids.
Kate, and I'm actually also thinking about the kids who don't want to know and don't want to hear from you at all when there are things you really feel you have to say.
That's really important. Let's make sure to get to that. And then I think we should spend a second or two talking about how to manage with older kids specifically. And what to do if you and your partner just cannot agree on a message. Which happens a lot.
The wisdom is that you sit them down and you present a united message, right, Kate?
That's the wisdom, but it's not always the reality. Right. Okay, so I mentioned a moment ago that you might want to take a beat to think about what it means to say to your kids, your mom or your dad cheated and that's why we're getting divorced. And that's, I didn't want that. And, whether you add the moral piece or not. I completely understand why someone might want to do that. There's the issue I mentioned before where, why should you have to take responsibility? It's bad enough that it's happening. Why should you sort of present yourself as having volition in this, right? Some people say, well, I've never lied to my kids before. I'm not going to start now. They're going to know. And other people, honestly, they really do want to punish their spouse.
Absolutely.
And it's not that hard to understand.
Yeah.
But the one of the problems is that, your kids are identified with both their parents. They just are. And what that means is that there's a sort of a piece of each of you that lives inside your child. Mm-hmm. And, for good or ill, and usually for both.
Yeah.
And if you attack one of their parents, then essentially what you're doing is you're attacking that part of your child that wants to be like them or just frankly loves them and feels that they are connected to them through a kind of invisible thread.
Yeah, I've not heard it put quite that way. That's really important.
It's really important because basically what you're doing when you vilify your spouse, even for good reasons, is that you're attacking that part of your child.
Yeah.
You're attacking their self-esteem. And that actually can have lifelong implications in a variety of ways, including, importantly, their ability to form healthy, loving relationships in the future. The other thing to think about is that in order to make a healthy adjustment to your divorce, it's really important for kids to be able to express to both of you their full range of feelings, right? Whatever they are. And if you send the message to your kids that you want them to see your future ex as completely at fault or bad or deeply flawed morally, then what's likely to happen is that, depending on the age of your kids and the nature of your relationship and who they are as people, that they're likely to do one of two things. They're either likely to keep their upset about, well, any number of things, including you.
Yeah.
Right. But, about the situation away from you because they will want to protect you. They'll have a sense of how injured you feel, and they will just keep that part to themselves. Or they'll repress it, sort of like tamp it down. Yeah. Or they'll actually, ironically, and this will really upset you, they'll just go to the other parent, the one who cheated, because it's safer.
Yes.
There are other things that can happen that might feel better to you, but not be healthy for your kids, like they will join you in disparaging the other parent because they know that that's the way you want them to feel. Or you may say, well, I don't really want them to feel that. I just want them to know the reality, and I don't want them to repeat this kind of behavior in the future. Well, the way to help kids not behave badly is through teaching over time, through modeling good behavior, all that kind of thing. So you don't want to do anything that shuts your child down from feeling free and safe to express their full range of emotions with you. And sometimes that's anger at you. And that can feel really bad when you feel like the anger should be going in the other direction. But, accepting our kids' aggression toward us is something that starts really early on. Yeah. And, not, toddlers are mad at us because they can't tie their shoes, but you don't take that out on them. And kids are mad at us because, we are getting divorced even when we don't want it. And it's really hard to take that on and take that in and let it be true. But it's important to do it, even if you have to at the same time redress some misunderstandings, which, we've talked about in a previous episode. Sometimes there's stuff your kids say about you that is just simply not true, and you have to find a way of addressing that. But letting them be mad at you because you're making them go through a divorce even when you don't want it is really important.
Kate, I just want to just witness this for a moment because this is so important. It's just so important and so very difficult to do. It's so difficult to manage your feelings and tolerate them when all you want to do is lash out, and consciously or unconsciously, you want your kid to hate them too.
Of course you do.
Yeah. It's a rough one.
And wanting your kid to hate their parent is, I mean, so much part and parcel of, to hate the other parent is part and parcel of many, many divorces. But like, talk about that with your best friend.
Yes.
Scream into a pillow.
Yes.
But when it comes to your kid.
Right. Leave them out of it.
Just fake it.
You're right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. The other thing is that blaming your child's other parent, and again, we're talking about how you present it to the kids, really backfires quite often. Because especially older kids really don't want to hear it.
Yeah.
They very often don't want to hear it. And they may for a while just sort of placate you or protect you. But over time, they will experience your stories about how bad their other parent is, about your pain, which they really don't want to take on, frankly, even if they love you, which they do, and want you to be okay. They will very often come to resent being pulled into that dynamic. And I've seen it over and over again where the sort of the very hurt spouse ends having a rupture in the relationship with their child. Or the child will say, I want to go live with mommy, even though mommy is now living with the person she had an affair with. It's
but
very
mommy
painful.
Isn't laying bitterness on them all the time. And
That's
the feeling is a little
mommy
better.
isn't making them choose or putting them in the middle.
Yeah.
The other thing is that if there is a villain, there must be a victim. And even if, consciously, especially in the early days of the divorce, you want your kids to see you as the wronged party, think about the question of whether you want your kids to see you as a victim. I don't mean that you can protect your kids from the fact that something upsetting happened to you, or that you should try. And we'll talk about that in a minute. How do you acknowledge the reality? But I do think that there is a difference between saying, this painful thing happened and, I'm coping, and saying, and giving the message that I'm a person who, when bad things happen to me, I am angry. I am, I am sort of, I don't know, it becomes sort of part of my identity.
Right. And
I go around complaining and I'm devastated and destroyed, especially if that lingers as, a way of being, because your kids are, just like I said before, they're identified with you.
Yes.
And you don't want your kid walking around the world feeling like, I can't survive trauma.
Right.
Or,
and the world's a bad
the world's
place.
a bad, unsafe place. You can't trust, romantic partners or people, or looking around the world to find, people who remind them of you, the victimized parent, and, become caretakers. That's often what happens to their own detriment. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. The last thing I'll say sort of about this piece of, how your presentation of the situation affects a child's sense of themselves is that if you pull, a child into an alliance or attempt to against the other parent, even in this way, by saying, because of this behavior, I want you to have a relationship with your cheating dad, but, he's a really bad guy. And people do this all the time.
Yes.
And do it unconsciously. They say they're supporting the relationship at the same time. They're
heavy-duty mixed message.
Heavy-duty, right. Sort of like silent sabotaging.
Yeah.
Or not so silent. It is soul-killing to the child. I mean, it's not just that they have trouble because they aren't being allowed to identify with both parents, but it becomes part of a pattern of bifurcation between the two households, which is sort of like a line running down the middle of your kid's ego. And they grow up feeling like, okay, I have two families and never the twain shall meet. And it's really different from saying I have a reconstituted family that lives in two households and, there are some strains, but nobody is asking me to be part of two completely separate countries.
Yeah. Or to choose.
Which is really horrible.
Yeah.
Okay. So for the next couple of points, let's assume for the moment that the kids we're talking about, that your kids are younger. So school age, or younger than middle school. What if your kid comes to you and asks a direct question, right? Did mom or did dad fall in love with someone else? And this happens, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they've cottoned on to the fact that has actually happened. There are a number of questions. It may be that, and you have to address that.
Yeah.
But it may mean that, they're just trying to make sense of what's going on in their family. I mean, they are just trying to make sense.
Yeah.
And maybe they saw something on television in which, somebody had an affair. It's likely that they did. Or maybe they're thinking of a fairy tale in which that was a theme. Or maybe their best friend told them about it.
Yeah.
Or maybe they have picked up unconsciously something about the strain between you. And it's kind of amazing what kids are able to talk about without really understanding it if the theme is kind of there. They have these, I talk about it as like emotional radar detectors.
Yes.
So I think rather than jumping into answering the question concretely, which you may need to do, it's important, as in many situations with divorce, to step back a second and try to figure out what your child is actually asking you. Because how you respond is going to be it should be based on what they're actually asking, not what you think they're asking or what it sounds like they're asking. So I think a good response is usually a curious question first. And some empathic comment and a curious question. So if your 7-year-old or a 5-year-old comes to you and says, did mom or dad fall in love with somebody else? You might say something like, you're trying to make sense or understand what is going on between daddy and me, mommy and me. And I'll do my best to answer you. But what makes you ask about that? Honey, like, why is this on your mind?
Yeah.
Because that's important. And you want that information anyway, because you do want to know, what have they overheard, so you can help them with it. Or, is this something that they dreamed about or something they're terribly worried about? And all of this will help you in crafting your response. It's also really important to remember that when you don't have the answer at hand, and a lot of the time you won't, most of the time you won't when it comes to this kind of stuff, it's fine to take a moment or to say to your child, you know what, that's a really important question, and I want to give you a good answer. I'm not quite sure how to answer it right now, so let me think about it today or for a little while or till tomorrow, and I promise you that I'll come back to you with an answer. And I'm glad you asked me, and you should always feel free to ask me. If your relationship with your future ex is cordial and you're both struggling, you're in pain, but you're not unable to discuss the situation and understand that it's something you're working on, trying to figure out how to noodle through, then you can say, I'm not sure how to answer your question about whether dad or mom is in love with someone else. Or if I'm not sure, sometimes kids will say, is dad going to get married again?
I mean, the fact that you can't just say no.
It might be. It might be, but that's okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not suggesting you lie. If you have information, I'm not suggesting you pretend you don't.
Right.
You can say, well, actually, daddy or mommy has met someone else that they care about. I'm not really sure how to talk about that with you or how to answer it yet. Let me talk to dad. Let me talk to mom, and we will think about the best way to explain it, and we will talk to you.
I really am liking this sort of thoughtful, slow it down response and just talk about the fact that they asked the question and you're being there in one way, the parent is being very transparent, saying, I need to think about this.
Right.
And let's come back to it and talk about it.
Absolutely. So essentially, I mean, what I am saying is that very young kids. So, I mean, we're talking like 5 and under, maybe. I mean, it depends, some 5-year-olds are kind of precocious.
Yeah.
Others, are not. But I see no good, really. I see nothing good in telling a very young child that, who can talk about their feelings only in the kind of most basic ways and really are not able to process complicated stuff. I see no value if they don't already know about the affair.
Yes.
In telling them about it. Unless the relationship is ongoing and likely to be permanent. In which case, you need to say soon, that one parent has met someone else. But you don't need to present it as infidelity, which has no meaning to them at that point.
Right.
People want to. I just don't know what comes of it. There will be time in the future when that will become part of the narrative, needs to become part of the narrative. There will be questions, especially if you're in a new relationship that is, part of an affair that started during the marriage. They're going to ask questions,
Sure.
When did you meet? So,
Right.
Veronica? But, later they have the cognitive and emotional ability to process it differently.
Absolutely.
I just don't know what a toddler is going to get out of that information.
Yeah.
So, that can be tough to be restrained in that way. But I just don't know why you'd burden a kid who can't understand it. The other thing is that if you can stomach it, and even if it feels unfair, I really do recommend that you try, if you can, to come up with some kind of a shared narrative with your ex. That doesn't actually vilify them, make them the 100% bad guy. Yeah. And I say that, but I want to repeat, I'm not advocating lying or withholding truth to kids who are old enough to understand it. I'm really not. But there's a big difference between saying this happened and it was hurtful, but, really what we've decided is we can't be married anymore.
Yeah.
Or, for somebody who really feels this way and sees things in a more nuanced way, actually, we've been working on our marriage for a very long time. This happened, but it's not the only thing that happened.
Yeah.
And we've made this decision. Like, mommy's pretty sad right now because daddy, did meet someone else. But really, we've both been sad for a long time. We've been working on the marriage. If you've been in therapy with the kids old enough, you could even say that. And say, that we thought, something important to say is we've thought about this a lot. We've talked about it a lot.
Yes.
We didn't make this decision quickly. And then all the other stuff that we talk about. It's not your
Yes.
fault. You were not responsible.
Right.
And, this happens with grown-ups. It never happens with grown-ups and kids. And we're still going to love you and continue to be your parents together. That's not always something that people can do. But if you can do it, it makes it an awful lot easier on your kids. Now, let's talk about older kids. So, middle school, high school, college, and up. All of the rules I've just talked about apply in thinking about, the negative impact on kids of presenting it as a black and white situation. But the truth is, most infidelity does not happen in a vacuum. So I know, and I said earlier, there are people who are going to say, well, that doesn't matter. Whatever else was going on in the marriage, this is the trump card. And okay, that may be true, and you may need to tell your kids that, but you can still try not to put them in the middle, make them choose, act as if that is a complete, defines their form, their other parent's personality completely, means they shouldn't have a relationship with them. I mean, you can still try to keep that stuff in check.
Kate, let me just underscore what you said, because that may be a new idea for some people who are listening to us, that infidelity doesn't happen in a vacuum.
It really doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
Or almost never.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, if you are able to say, okay, you know, and I think you probably need to with older kids who are kind of all, you know, they just don't miss anything. They notice very small changes in their parents' behaviors. And when you're having an affair, you're sneaking into the bathroom to text you. There's a lilt in your voice.
Yeah.
There's a giddy up in your whatever in your walk. There's just a difference. And I mean, I remember, this is a funny story. It's not funny. This is just an example. After my parents' divorce, and I was 9, my mother went to a work event, and she came back, and she was just talking about who was there. So-and-so was there, so-and-so was there, this guy, George, was there. And that night, I had a dream, and that she married George. And I told her about it, and she's like, oh my God, that's incredible. Like, I totally have a crush on George.
Really?
Yeah, she had to cop to it, but it was not in the words she said. She said nothing different about him than she said about anybody else.
Yes.
But she's my mother.
Just an energy that you,
yes,
as her kid.
Something in her voice that, you know, like only dogs and children hear.
Right, exactly.
You know? Okay. So I'm suggesting that if you can take some responsibility, you know, for the difficulties in the marriage, and they would say it was a kind of a co-failure, co-construction.
Yeah.
I don't really like the word failure, but it was something that you were both in on. Then it's just a whole lot easier on your kids. But you can say, you know, if you have to, you know, and really, if you're the person who did it, you know, you should cop to it, and we're going to talk about that in our next episode.
Yeah.
But you don't have to fall on your sword. Neither of you does, right? To say, you know, we've both been struggling doesn't mean you have to say, but I failed your dad, or I failed your mom, or, and I don't recommend it. I really don't.
What's your thinking about that?
Well, it's the victim thing. It's the black and white thinking, really. It's the idea that if you do one thing wrong, you're bad.
Yeah.
I mean, you want your kids walking around thinking that people fall out of grace because they make a poor choice.
Yes.
Yep. Okay, so I think there's some things we could sort of say in summary about this. I think, especially for now, if you're, you know, early in the process of separating and divorcing, kids of all ages really do best when parents are able to get on the same page about what the message is, even if the message contains the fact that we don't agree on some part of this story. Like, mom feels this and dad feels this, but, and that's fair. You know, we feel a little bit differently, but overall, we both agree that things have not been working. Or even, you know, we both don't agree, but we both love you, and we're both going to continue to take care of you and support you in having a relationship. Just as much overlap as possible, but in areas where there is no overlap, and a joint acknowledgement of that.
Yes. And Kate, I'm also thinking about how the way you set the tone at the beginning is going to really color the way the kids deal with this.
It really is.
Yeah.
And the way they deal with lots of situations going forward. And, you know, as the kids get older, their questions and their ability to process more complex answers is going to grow. So this can help. If you're really struggling, it might help you to remember that your family story will become more fleshed out. Your responses to their questions can become, you know, more embroidered. They can handle the diverging perspectives of you and your ex much better as they get older. If you don't present it to them that they have to choose. If you just say, this is kind of what went down, you know, and it was painful, but it really doesn't have anything to do with your relationship. It just has to do with your understanding your own history. you child of mine.
Yes.
The other thing I think I'll sort of end with is that it's really hard to imagine if you have recently been cheated on. It's very difficult to imagine. But even if you never fully forgive your cheating spouse, your feelings of anger are really likely to soften over time. And it would be pretty tragic if you sent a destructive message to your kids now that you couldn't take back later. And if it helps, you can remind yourself that you are not doing this to protect your spouse. You're doing it to protect your children.
Those are words to live by.
Okay, spliticism time.
Yay. This is always my favorite part of the show.
Yeah, it's fun.
Kate, this is our tradition of closing this show with our little pieces of divorce wisdom.
Yes,
right?
Our little pearls of wisdom, our little anti-platitudes.
May I go first, Kate?
Please do. You always do.
Here is mine. Look, listeners, hold off on sending those evites for your "my divorce is finally final, come help me celebrate" party.
Have a margarita
right,
on me.
Exactly.
Sign the papers.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, even if you initiated the split or have gotten to the place where you feel it's the right thing or just ready for it to be over, even though, of course, this divorce is really just a legal technicality. You know, you may be surprised at how hard this hits you. After all, it represents ending, finality, and that can stir up a lot of feelings of loss or of anger, of sadness. Mm-hmm. I think it might make sense to plan for it, perhaps to be with friends for support. And, you know, if you feel like cracking open a bottle of champagne, go for it. But if you just want to have a non-judgmental shoulder to cry on, you'll have that too.
Yeah, I think that's a great point.
Yeah.
It's a great point. I think people expect to feel like free at last,
yeah,
free
right,
at last. And what
right.
they really feel like is alone forever, forever.
Okay, right.
I'm laughing, but it's sometimes hits you like in a way you don't expect.
Right.
Okay, here's my spliticism. It's also about the idea of the final legal divorce. Parents ask me all the time, okay, my divorce is final next week. We're going to in front of the judge and then, you know, they're going to stamp it. How should I tell my kids that the divorce is finally final? And my answer, don't. You don't. You don't actually, and you shouldn't. The divorce happens for your kids when you start talking about it with them. You know, and when you separate and when they start sharing time with, you know, with you in different homes, there's no difference for your kids between a separation and a divorce unless you tell them this is a trial separation, you know, which is a whole other can of worms. You know, we might get back together and then they really are going to care.
Oh, gosh.
But all they're really going to care about is when you decide that you're going to get divorced versus get back together.
Yes.
If your kids, you know, ask you questions like, you know, is the divorce final? You're oversharing. Then it means you're telling them too much about the legal process, even older kids. Now, sometimes kids will snoop and they will see, you know, your marital separation agreement on your computer, or they'll see court dates, and then you have to answer those questions. But absent that, leave them out of it. Not a relevant date to them. Shouldn't be. That's my feeling about that.
Kate, that is a super important spliticism, actually. Well, back to my MC role. Thanks for listening to Divorce on Planet Earth, Kate Sharp's real-world advice for well-intentioned humans. We invite you to follow us on Facebook and Twitter at Divorce for Humans. That's Divorce, the number 4 Humans, and on YouTube at Divorce on Planet Earth. That way you'll know when we have a new blog post, video, or podcast. Speaking of blogs, you can read Kate's at divorceonplanetearth.com. And if you have a general divorce question or an idea for a show topic, please write to us at info@divorceonplanetearth.com. We'd love to hear from you, and we promise not to share your personal information, including real name and email address. Please remember that the ideas we share here can never fully address any one listener's specific situation and are not offered as therapy or divorce coaching and are not intended as a substitute for clinical services. Divorce on Planet Earth is produced by Eric Pagero. Our music was composed by Ben Kaunitz. I'm your co-host, Jane Prelinger.
I'm Kate Scharf.
Talk to you next time.